I first realized something was wrong the night I heard my mother thinking in a language that had no consonants, a wet dragging sound like something being pulled through mud inside my skull. And I remember sitting upright in bed at 2:17 a.m., heart racing, sweat cold on my neck, because the thought didn't feel human, didn't feel shaped by emotion or memory, but by hunger. And when I rushed into the hallway, I found her standing perfectly still in the dark, eyes open, smiling too widely, and in my head that same voice whispered, "Not yet, not ripe," and I screamed. But she didn't react. She just turned slowly and walked back into her room. And the next morning she was normal again, laughing, making coffee, asking if I slept well, while I sat shaking at the table, afraid to ask what I already knew was impossible, because this wasn't the first time I had heard thoughts that weren't mine, but it was the first time I recognized they weren't human. See, I've always heard other people's thoughts, ever since childhood. A curse I learned to hide after I told my teacher what she was thinking, and she slapped me and said I was possessed. And for years I convinced myself it was imagination. Intuition, empathy turned up to high, but human thoughts have a texture to them, a rhythm, an emotional echo, and what I heard that night had none of that. It was cold and layered, like multiple voices sharing one sentence. And after that night, it didn't stop. I heard it in strangers on the bus, in my co-workers, in my best friend who one day thought the shell is weakening while hugging me goodbye. And when I pulled away in fear, she looked confused, hurt, human, but the thing behind her eyes was not. And I started cataloging the differences, how humans think in fragments and emotions, while these others thought in objectives and timings. And always about harvest. And the more I listened, the more I realized the world was full of them, walking normally, blending perfectly, wearing faces like borrowed clothes, and the worst part was that most of them didn't know they weren't human, because the thoughts I heard were layered under a surface mind that mimicked real emotion, like a parasite dreaming it was the host, until something triggered it, stress, fear, exhaustion, and then the deeper thoughts leaked through, words like convergence, incubation, threshold. And I tried to warn people, subtly at first, asking questions, probing. But the moment someone suspected me of knowing, the voice inside them would turn directly toward me, and I would feel it press against my mind like fingers against glass. And then I would hear observer identified, and that was when the nightmares began. Because now they were thinking about me, not in anger or panic, but in calculation. And one night, as I lay awake, pretending to sleep, I heard dozens of thoughts at once, rising like a chorus, coming from every apartment around mine. Every human-shaped thing whispering he hears us. And I ran. I didn't pack, didn't plan, just fled into the street barefoot. But the city was alive with them, smiling, talking, living. And beneath it all, that same underlying signal, like a broadcast frequency only I could hear, growing louder, more urgent, until I collapsed in an alley and begged whatever was listening to leave me alone. And something answered, not in words, but in understanding, showing me flashes of ancient shapes beneath the earth, of civilizations seeded and consumed, of minds like mine occurring once every few thousand cycles as errors, anomalies. And I understood then that they weren't invaders. They were caretakers of a process older than humanity, and we were the crop. And my ability was never meant to hear human thoughts at all. It was meant to hear them, to know when the cycle was ready, and the reason they hadn't killed me yet was because they needed me intact. A living tuning fork, and when I woke up, I was in a white room, strapped to a chair, surrounded by familiar faces. My mother, my friend, my co-workers watching silently as a doctor leaned close and thought initiation complete. And for the first time, the thoughts in my head were no longer my own. because something vast and patient had finally found a place to speak through me.